Osemu had always been called Big Man, but not for the reasons most people would expect. He was tall, standing at 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders and a strong, muscular build that made him stand out wherever he went. His deep brown skin gleamed in the sun, and his strikingly handsome face often drew compliments from strangers. But despite his looks, the nickname Big Man had nothing to do with his height or his charm. It came from something far more personal. As a child, Osemu never understood why people whispered when he walked by, or why the boys at school would nudge each other and point at him. He was just a regular boy, playing football in the streets and climbing trees like the rest of them. But as he grew older, he began to notice something. His body was different. Growing up in the small town of Edu, where everyone knew everyone, Osemu couldn't escape the stares or the whispers. The older he got, the more he noticed how the other boys avoided him. They would laugh behind his back but never say anything to his face. The girls weren't any better. They treated him like he was some kind of joke. By the time he was a teenager, Osemu understood the full weight of his nickname. His body, more specifically, the size of his manhood, was what set him apart. Some might think that having such a trait would be something to be proud of, but for Osemu, it was a curse. He couldn't form normal relationships. Every time he tried to talk to a girl, he could feel her eyes darting to his waist, and he knew the thoughts that crossed her mind. Even when they didn't say anything, the curiosity in their eyes was clear. At 25, Osemu had never been in a serious relationship. His only experiences with women had ended in disappointment and rejection. He remembered the time he had met Adana, a beautiful, confident woman who had seemed interested in him. They had gone out a few times and things were going well until the night they became intimate. The moment she realized his physical difference, she had pulled away, her face a mixture of confusion and discomfort. She didn't say much afterward, but her silence spoke volumes. She stopped calling him, and eventually, they drifted apart. That experience wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Every time Osemu allowed himself to get close to someone, the result was the same: rejection, shame, and loneliness. The woman always pulled back and left at the sight of his manhood. At 25, Osemu had resigned himself to a life of loneliness. He worked at a construction company during the day and spent his evenings alone in his small apartment. His mother often asked him why he hadn't brought a girl home yet. "Osemudiamen," she would say, using his full name. "You're not getting any younger, oh. When will I see my grandchildren?" Osemu would smile and brush her off with a laugh. "Mama, there's still time. Don't worry." But inside, he wasn't so sure. He didn't think he would ever find someone who could look past the whispers, the jokes, and the stares. He didn't think he would ever find love. Meanwhile, in the sprawling city of Lagos, where dreams were big and the hustle never stopped, lives a beautiful woman named Valeria. Valeria was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Her beauty was striking, the type that seemed effortless and natural. She stood tall, her skin the rich, smooth color of polished ebony, glowing under the sun. Her long neck gave her a regal air, and her high cheekbones framed large, expressive eyes that could hold anyone's gaze. People often commented on her perfect figure, with curves that seemed to flow seamlessly from her full hips to her narrow waist. Every time she walked through the busy streets of Lagos, men and women alike couldn't help but admire her grace and poise. Despite her beauty, Valeria was never one to flaunt it. She dressed simply, often in bright Ankara fabrics that accentuated her dark skin, yet her clothes never revealed too much. Even with her modesty, it was impossible not to notice her shape. Her body had a perfect balance, a blend of strength and softness, curves and edges, all in the right places. She was the kind of woman others admired from afar, envying her natural elegance and the way she seemed to move through life effortlessly. But behind the beauty that others saw, Valeria carried a heavy secret, one that had burdened her since she was young. From the outside, her life seemed perfect, but her heart was heavy with a fear she couldn't share with anyone. No one knew the pain she felt when she looked in the mirror, realizing that her body wasn't like the others, that something was different. Something she couldn't control or fix. Valeria grew up in Lagos, the city of hustle and endless opportunities. She had built a successful life for herself, running a vibrant fabric stall in the famous Balogun market. Her shop was known for its array of high-quality Ankara prints, and customers came from all over the city to buy from her. Valeria had an eye for beauty, whether it was in the intricate patterns of fabric or the way she dressed her customers, always helping them pick the perfect design for their bodies. Business was good, and on the surface, it seemed like she had it all. But despite the success she had in her business, Valeria had spent years battling with a secret that kept her from letting anyone too close. When she was 12, she had noticed something unusual about her body. She didn't understand it at first, but as she got older it became clear that her vagina was larger than what she had heard was normal. While other girls blossomed and talked about boys and love, Valeria withdrew, afraid that if anyone ever found out, they would reject her. She had tried to talk to her mother about it once, but her mother had brushed it off, telling her, "Don't worry, my daughter. Every woman's body is different. You will be fine." But Valeria didn't feel fine. The weight of her difference grew heavier with each passing year. In secondary school, the boys always flocked to her. Her beauty attracted them like moths to a flame, and she constantly received letters and gifts from admirers. Her friends often teased her about how easily she could get any man she wanted, but they didn't know the truth. Valeria was terrified of what might happen if any man got too close. When she was 20, she finally allowed herself to fall for a man named Emeka. He was kind, gentle, and treated her with respect. For the first time in her life, Valeria thought she could let someone in. They dated for a few months, and everything seemed perfect, until the night they became intimate. The moment Emeka touched her, he hesitated. Valeria saw the confusion and discomfort in his eyes, and her worst fears were confirmed. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. After that night he became distant, his once warm affection replaced with awkwardness. A few weeks later they stopped seeing each other. The experience shattered Valeria. She withdrew even further, dedicating herself completely to her work. She told herself that love wasn't for her, that it was safer to stay alone than to risk being rejected again. She poured everything she had into her fabric business, growing it into one of the most successful stalls in the market. But even as customers praised her, and she found fulfillment in her work, a part of her remained empty. Her mother, much like Osemu's, often asked her why she hadn't brought a man home yet. "Valeria, you are almost 30. What are you waiting for? You're not getting any younger," her mother would say, worry etched in her voice. Valeria would always smile and reply, "Mama, I'm focusing on my business for now. Don't worry, there's still time." But in her heart, Valeria knew the truth. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She had already given up on love. No matter how many compliments she received about her beauty, no matter how perfect people thought her shape was, Valeria's heart was weighed down by the belief that no man could truly accept her because of the unusual size of her private part. She had stopped hoping for love long ago. It was a typical hot afternoon in Lagos, with the sun high in the sky, casting its bright rays over the bustling Balogun market. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of traders shouting prices, customers bargaining, and the occasional honk from a passing kiki. Among the noise and chaos, Valeria stood behind her fabric stall, calmly arranging her new Ankara prints. Business had been good that week. She had just received a fresh supply of fabrics from Ghana, and the bold colors and intricate patterns were attracting a lot of attention. Valeria took pride in her work, carefully folding each fabric and ensuring that her stall always looked inviting. Customers would often stop to admire the materials before making their purchase, and today was no different. As she was folding a new fabric, she noticed a tall man approaching her stall. He stood out immediately, not just because of his height, but because of his presence. He was strikingly handsome, with broad shoulders and a strong build that gave him an air of quiet confidence. His skin was the deep brown of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors, and his face, though serious, was kind. Valeria couldn't help but glance at him as he walked towards her. Osemu had been in Lagos for a week now, overseeing a construction project in the city. It was tiring work, and he had been spending most of his time at the site, But today, he had some free time. He had heard about the famous Balogun market from his colleagues, and though he wasn't one for crowded places, he decided to visit. He needed to pick up some gifts for his mother and sister back home in Benin, and he figured the market would have something interesting. As he wandered through the market, his eyes fell on a vibrant display of fabrics at one of the stalls. The colors were bold, and the patterns were unlike anything he had seen before. Curious, he made his way over to take a closer look. Valeria glanced up from her work as he approached, meeting his eyes for the briefest moment. She felt a small flutter in her chest, though she quickly dismissed it. He was just another customer after all. Still, there was something about him that made her feel noticed, but not in the way she was used to. "Good afternoon," Osemu said politely, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the market. "Good afternoon," Valeria replied with a soft smile. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" Osemu shook his head, his eyes scanning the vibrant fabrics neatly displayed before him. "No, just browsing. I'm looking for something nice to take home as a gift." Valeria nodded and gestured toward the fabrics. "We just received these new prints from Ghana. They're very popular." Osemu picked up one of the fabrics, running his hand over the smooth material. The colors were bright, reds, yellows, and greens woven into complex patterns that told a story. He admired the craftsmanship, though he knew very little about fabrics. He wasn't really here for the cloth. Something about Valeria had drawn him to this stall. As they spoke, Osemu couldn't help but notice Valeria's beauty. She was striking, but in a way that didn't feel forced or showy. Her skin seemed to glow under the sunlight, and her eyes were large, dark, and thoughtful. There was a calmness about her, a quiet grace that made her stand out even in the chaos of the busy market. She wasn't like the other women who sometimes tried to get his attention with loud voices and bold gestures. There was something different about her, something gentle. Valeria, for her part, found herself drawn to Osemu in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't look at her the way other men did. He wasn't staring or making flirtatious comments. He seemed genuinely interested in the fabrics, though there was a kindness in his eyes that made her feel comfortable. They continued to talk, exchanging polite conversation about the fabrics and the market. Osemu asked a few questions about where the materials came from, and Valeria answered with her usual soft-spoken confidence. She found herself enjoying the conversation, though she couldn't quite explain why. There was something about Osemu's presence that made her feel at ease. After a few minutes, Osemu picked out a fabric, a bright red and yellow print that caught his eye. "I'll take this one," he said, handing it to Valeria. She smiled as she took the fabric from him and began to wrap it up. "Your mother will love it," she said, her eyes meeting his briefly. For a moment, there was a quiet connection between them, something unspoken, but understood. As she handed him the wrapped fabric, their fingers brushed briefly. The touch was fleeting, but it left a small spark in the air. Osemu hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe I'll see you again," he said, his voice warm but casual. Valeria's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but the idea of seeing him again didn't feel as frightening as it usually did. "Maybe," she replied with a soft smile of her own. Osemu nodded, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the busy crowd of the market. As Valeria watched him go, she felt a strange sense of anticipation settle over her. It had been a long time since she had felt anything like this. This sense of connection, of curiosity about someone else. She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts aside. He was just a customer, and she had no reason to expect anything more. Still, as she returned to her work, folding fabrics and tending to other customers, Valeria couldn't help but think about the tall, handsome man who had stopped by her stall that afternoon. Something about him lingered in her mind, like the memory of a dream she couldn't quite shake off. Over the next few weeks, Osemu found himself returning to Balogun Market more often than he had planned. Each time he visited Lagos for work, he made it a habit to stop by Valeria's fabric stall. At first, he told himself it was just for the fabrics. Gifts for his family, he reasoned, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was something about Valeria that drew him in, something he couldn't quite put into words. For Valeria, Osemu's visits were a welcome change. She had many regular customers, but none of them were like Osemu. He didn't just stop by to make a purchase and leave. He stayed, talking to her about life, work, and their experiences in the city. Valeria found herself looking forward to their conversations, and each time he visited, they talked for longer, their conversations becoming more personal. Osemu told her about his work in construction, the challenges of managing projects in different cities, and his family back in Benin. Valeria, in turn, shared stories about growing up in Lagos and how she had built her fabric business from the ground up. They laughed about the chaotic market life and shared small details about their day-to-day routines. Despite their growing bond, both Osemu and Valeria kept their personal insecurities hidden. Osemu hadn't mentioned the reason behind his nickname Big Man, and Valeria hadn't told him about the secret that had kept her from relationships for so long. They were drawn to each other, but they were still cautious, afraid of what might happen if the other person knew the truth. As the days passed, their connection deepened. Osemu found himself staying longer at Valeria's stall each time, and she started to notice the subtle changes in their interactions. His voice softened when he spoke to her, and her heart quickened whenever she saw him approaching. It wasn't just small talk anymore. It was something more. One afternoon, as they sat together near her stall, watching the market buzz with life, Osemu asked a question that caught Valeria off guard. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked, gesturing toward the crowd of customers and traders moving around them. Valeria smiled softly, thinking for a moment before answering, "Sometimes. It can be exhausting. But this is my life. I've built something here and it keeps me going." Osemu nodded thoughtfully, his gaze lingering on her. "You're strong, Valeria. You've built all of this on your own." She blushed slightly at the compliment, looking away for a moment. "It's not always easy, but thank you." For a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them. Then, Osemu spoke again, his tone more serious this time. "I'm glad I met you." Valeria's heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at him, their eyes meeting in a way that felt different from before. There was something in his gaze, something sincere and genuine that made her feel seen. Not just for her beauty, but for who she was. "I'm glad I met you too," she replied softly. And with that simple exchange, something shifted between them. It wasn't spoken, but both Osemu and Valeria knew that what they were feeling was more than just friendship. Yet even as they grew closer, the fear of revealing their deepest insecurities still loomed over them, like a shadow waiting to be addressed. One evening, after one of his regular visits to Valeria's stall, Osemu suggested they take a walk by the Lagos Lagoon. The sun was beginning to set. The streets were less crowded as the market began to wind down for the day, and the gentle breeze coming from the water offered a welcome relief from the heat. Valeria hesitated for a moment. She had grown comfortable with Osemu during their chats at the market, but spending time alone with him outside the familiar space of her stall was something new. Yet there was a part of her that wanted to say yes, a part that had started to feel safe in his presence. So she agreed. They walked side by side along the lagoon, the sound of the water lapping against the shore calming their thoughts. For a while they didn't speak, just enjoying the peaceful silence between them. It was as if they both knew this moment was different, more than just casual company. They were on the verge of something deeper, but neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge it yet. As they found a quiet spot under the shade of a tree, they sat down, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. Osemu glanced at Valeria, his heart heavy with the words he had been holding back for weeks. He had grown to care for her, more than he expected, but the fear of what she might think if she knew the truth about him still lingered in his mind. After a long pause, Osemu finally broke the silence. "Valeria," he began slowly, his voice unusually serious. "There's something I need to tell you." Valeria turned to him, her heart suddenly beating fast. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing those words made her chest tighten with anxiety. She had her own secret, one she had been hiding for years, and now it felt like the walls she had built around her heart were about to be torn down. "I've been carrying something with me for a long time," Osamu continued, his eyes focused on the water in front of them. "Something that has made it hard for me to get close to anyone. It's about my manhood." Valeria's breath caught in her throat. She knew exactly what he meant. She'd been carrying the same burden for years. The thought of opening up to someone, of being vulnerable, had always terrified her. But sitting here with Osamu, she realized that she wasn't alone in her fear. "I understand," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have something to tell you too." Osamu looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected her to say that. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of their secrets hanging between them like a heavy cloud. The fear of rejection, the shame of their differences, it all seemed to hover in the air, waiting to be exposed. "I've been afraid to get close to anyone," Osamu admitted, his voice low. "Because of what people say about me. I've never been able to have a real relationship. Every time I try, they see me as something different." Valeria's heart ached as she listened to him. She had felt the same way for so long, trapped by the fear that no one could ever truly accept her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, trying to steady her voice. "I'm the same," she whispered, her words trembling with emotion. "My body, it's not like other women's. I've never been able to get close to anyone because I'm afraid of what they'll think. I have a large vagina, and because of this I've been rejected by men. And it broke me." Osamu reached for her hand, his touch gentle and warm. "Valeria," he said softly, "I don't care about that. I've spent my whole life feeling like I was different, but with you I don't feel that way. You make me feel normal. You make me feel like I'm enough." Valeria looked into his eyes, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. She wasn't alone. They had both been carrying the same burden, but together, it didn't feel as heavy anymore. In the weeks that followed, Osamu and Valeria's relationship deepened in ways neither of them had ever expected. The weight of their secrets no longer hung between them. Having opened up to each other about their insecurities, they found a sense of peace that they had both been missing for so long. They no longer had to hide. They no longer had to fear rejection. For the first time in their lives, they felt truly accepted for who they were, not for how they appeared or what people expected them to be. Their bond grew naturally. Osamu would visit Valeria's stall more often, not just to talk, but to spend time with her. She had become his safe place, a calming presence in the midst of the noise and chaos of his life. Valeria, in turn, found herself looking forward to his visits more than anything else. She would catch herself smiling whenever she saw his tall figure approaching her stall in the market, his warm presence always making her day a little brighter. They began spending more time together outside the market. Some evenings they would walk along the lagoon, talking about everything and nothing. Osamu would tell her stories about his work, about the challenges of overseeing construction projects in different cities, and Valeria would share her thoughts about expanding her fabric business. The conversations felt easy, like they had known each other for years. Despite the fears they had once harbored about being different, they found joy in each other's company. Osamu no longer felt the weight of the whispers that had followed him for so many years. With Valeria, he was just himself. He didn't have to worry about being judged or misunderstood. She saw him for who he truly was, and that was enough. For Valeria, Osamu brought a calmness to her life that she hadn't realized she needed. After years of pushing people away out of fear, she had found someone who made her feel comfortable in her own skin. She didn't have to hide from Osamu. She didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. He accepted her for all that she was, and in return, she felt free. Free from the shame, free from the fear of being rejected. Their love was quiet and steady, not rushed or forced. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. What they had was something simple but rare: understanding. They had found a partner who knew their pain, who shared their struggles, and who loved them for exactly who they were. One day, As they sat together by the lagoon, watching the sun set over the water, Osemu turned to Valeria and took her hand in his. He looked into her eyes, his expression serious, but filled with warmth. "Valeria," he said softly, "I never thought I would find someone like you. I never thought I would find someone who could accept me for who I am." Valeria smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "I feel the same way. I've spent so many years hiding, afraid of what people would think. But with you, I don't have to hide anymore." Osemu squeezed her hand gently. "I want us to build something together. A life where we don't have to be afraid. A life where we can just be ourselves." Tears filled Valeria's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. She had never imagined that she could feel this way, that she could find someone who truly understood her, someone who made her feel whole. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. And in that moment, sitting by the lagoon with the warm breeze blowing gently around them, Osemu and Valeria knew that they had found something special. Their love wasn't perfect, no love ever is, but it was real. It was built on acceptance, understanding, and a deep connection that went beyond the surface. Together, they had found a new beginning, a chance to build a life where they could love each other without fear, without judgment, and without shame. They had finally found the one thing they had been searching for their entire lives, a love that embraced their differences and celebrated who they truly were. After months of traveling back and forth between Benin and Lagos, Osemu finally made the decision to move permanently to Lagos. His construction business had been thriving since he secured several large contracts in the city, and the move felt like the next logical step. But more than that, the real reason for his move was Valeria. She had become his anchor, the person he wanted to build a future with. In Lagos, Osemu's business flourished even more. His reputation for being meticulous and dependable spread quickly, and soon his company was being recommended for some of the biggest projects in the city. He had found success, but more importantly, he had found happiness, with Valeria by his side. As they grew closer, the topic of marriage naturally entered their conversations. Osemu had known for some time that Valeria was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. She was everything he had been searching for: supportive, kind, and above all, understanding. Valeria, too, had come to realize that Osemu was the man she had always needed, someone who loved her not in spite of her differences, but because of them. One quiet evening, as they sat together in Valeria's small living room, Osemu turned to her with a soft smile. "Valeria," he began, taking her hand in his, "I want us to take the next step. I want us to get married. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Valeria's heart swelled with joy. She had never thought she would hear those words, not after all the years of feeling unworthy of love. But here he was, the man who had seen her for who she truly was, asking her to be his wife. With tears of happiness in her eyes, she nodded. "Yes, Osemu, I want that too." The wedding was simple, but beautiful. A celebration of their love in the presence of close family and friends. They didn't need anything grand. What mattered most was the bond they had built together, a bond that had withstood their insecurities and fears. Their families rejoiced, especially their mothers, who had long prayed for the day they would see their children settle down. As they exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through whatever life brought, both Osemu and Valeria knew they had found something rare, a love that was real, enduring, and free of judgment. That night, after the celebrations had ended, they retreated to their private space to share their first night together as husband and wife. It was a moment they had both been anxious about, their past experiences with intimacy always tinged with fear and disappointment. But tonight felt different. There were no secrets between them, no insecurities left to hide. They had already shared their deepest fears, and now, in this moment of closeness, they were ready to embrace the fullness of their love. As they undressed and came together, the connection between them was immediate and undeniable. What had once been sources of shame for both of them, their individual physical differences, now felt like pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly together. The intimacy they shared that night was beyond anything they had ever experienced before. There was no awkwardness, no fear of judgment, only love, acceptance, and a deep sense of belonging. In each other's arms, Osemu and Valeria found the peace they had both been searching for. The words, "There is someone for everyone," echoed in their minds, and they realized how true they were. For years, they had both felt rejected and different, but now they understood that their differences were what made them perfect for each other. They had found completeness, not in perfection, but in embracing the uniqueness they each carried. As the night went on, they held each other close, their bond growing even stronger with each passing moment. The walls of insecurity that had once separated them from others had crumbled, leaving behind only love and trust. Their relationship blossomed into something beautiful, a partnership that was built on mutual respect and understanding. In the days and weeks that followed, Osemu and Valeria's marriage became a source of strength for both of them. They supported each other in every way, free from the shame and fear that had once haunted them. Their love continued to grow, rooted in the deep connection they had formed, and together they faced the world with confidence, knowing that they had found something truly special. For the first time in their lives, they no longer felt burdened by their physical insecurities. Instead, they embraced their uniqueness and found joy in their shared intimacy. They had discovered that the very things that once made them feel different were the things that made them perfect for each other. In Osemu, Valeria found the acceptance she had always longed for, and in Valeria, Osemu found the understanding he had craved. Their love had transformed them both, leaving behind the pain of the past and paving the way for a future filled with love, acceptance, and joy. And in each other, they had found home.